So we've come to the crescendo of our course, the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, as it's also called. We can say it's unique in the Hebrew Bible. Certainly, it's the most erotic book in the Hebrew Bible. But immediately, the issues rise. Not one correct answer, only angles, only the stuff of which academic articles are made and published. Does it have a plot? And you can find scholars weighing in saying, we do see a plot. You have others who say, no, we don't. We have various voices, a male lover, a female lover, a chorus, aka the daughters of Jerusalem. How do we understand the various voices in the song? Best I could do for a photo of the daughters of Jerusalem. Sorry about that. The female speaks first. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Your loves are better than wine. Now, interestingly, the male lover refers to her as his sister. A locked garden is my sister, my spouse. A rock heap locked up, a fountain sealed. Another aspect we point out is various imagery that seems almost deliberately to hearken back to the Garden of Eden. Imagery of the garden. I have come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. These are just random observations, concluding with a very powerful poem having to do with the ultimacy, as it's sometimes called, of love. Set me as a seal on your heart, a seal on your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, the fire of God. Many waters can't quench it, nor rivers overflow it. If a man would give all the wealth of his house for love, it would be scorned. And of course, we have the Hebrew text, which we're going to revisit as we move on through. But again, our focus is on academic issues raised by an assortment of literary critics. Is there dramatic movement? Is it going somewhere? Some say, sure, we can find a movement, a progression. Others say, no, we can't find anything of the sort. Take your pick. The only one neutral is the professor. No one else will engage in fence sitting. Are the poems just unconnected sketches? Is that what they are? Just an assortment, a hodgepodge of sketches? Little vignettes that are thrown together, woven together, perhaps by some later editor? Maybe the song was actually used in ancient weddings in the land of Israel. A wedding poem, an extended wedding poem, but serving a pragmatic use for common people. Maybe these were country folk, the kind that you might find in an ancient wedding feast. People of the land. And they produce this song that seems to suggest royalty. In other words, you have common people at a wedding feast pretending to be, as it were, royal folk. Do we have any evidence for that particular contention, that theory, that angle, as an academic issue? Carol Myers has something to say in this regard. The Song of Songs, standing virtually alone among the biblical books, apart from the stratifying consequences of institutional and public life, reveals a situation of gender mutuality. Now, this is Carol Myers' angle as a contemporary feminist scholar. Do you agree? There is no trace of subordination of female to male in this poem. Think about that. I thought it was such a patriarchal society. Perhaps less patriarchal than imagined. As a uniquely popular work, It reflects a setting in the family that predominated in the pre-monarchic period and that continued to exist, though perhaps in altered ways thereafter. Popular work. So she's suggesting that it's like popular folk song, for example, and then is attributed to royalty. The song is a product of domestic life and not of the public world of kings and priests, bureaucrats and soldiers. It preserves a glimpse of the gender mutuality and female power that existed in family households. That's a mouthful and a very important argument on her part. Gender mutuality, female power in the households of ancient Israel, is she right? Is that perhaps too much to read into it? Or is she right? For the most part, the active role of women in household-oriented societies is not visible in the public written record. For the most part, in the literature that's come down to us, that includes biblical literature, the role of women is under-stressed, not visible, because it's a public written record. That doesn't mean, though, that women had no power. Even in this century, the place of women in such societies lacks visibility. Females in such settings do have real power. The cultural expression of female power in early Israel has miraculously survived in one small part of the official canonical record of that society. This is her angle. Every writer has an angle, and she's saying we have something unique here, something that slipped through into the official canon that actually reveals the power that women really had that you wouldn't otherwise notice. Females and power images are prominently linked in the Song of Songs, the lyrics of love. Female power in a complex household can imply a significant control by females over so-called public or extra-domestic functions. Cross-cultural studies suggest that public roles for women, though neither formalized nor regularized, were not trivial. First, the very way in which reproduction was viewed in the context of public as well as domestic needs indicates a role for women in society at large. Second, the existence of female charismatics, such as prophets, who were engaged in occasional public leadership activity, is a sign of the acceptance of females operating in areas affecting large segments of society. And third, the elevation of the concept of wisdom and skill expressed as a female figure to semi-divine status perhaps points subtly to the acceptance of female influence in public, political, and economic life. Carol Myers. Agree? Disagree? But certainly you recognize her angle, the point she's trying to argue. So we have the imposter theory. Maybe we have ordinary folk, country folk, feigning nobility, feigning royalty, pretending to be like king and queen at the wedding feast, almost like they're dressing in costume. Here comes the king, here comes the queen. But really, this is just ordinary country folk poetry. Maybe we'll call it My Fair Israelite Lady, by the way, a famous Broadway musical later turned into a film, with talk of perhaps a major Hollywood remake starring Keira Knightley. What's My Fair Lady about? A flower girl who is picked up by a professorial English gentleman who remakes her into a society lady and passes her off that way. Maybe that's what we've got going on in the Song of Songs. These are country folk, but they're pretending to be King Solomon and his court. Oh. Question: has our ancient Israelite author, perhaps a country bumpkin himself, passed off the lovers, also country bumpkins, as royalty? And we bought into it and imagined that it's actually the product of King Solomon and his lover? Or maybe we have a male lover king. That's another way to look at it. Feigning, that is, pretending provincial roots. Is that another possibility? adding fuel to the fire. Maybe a case of royal wondering about what it would be like to live not in the palace but out in the countryside, a pastoral existence. So maybe we have a king in competition with sort of a redneck lover. Obviously, many theories of origin. What's the connection with King Solomon? Is there any? Is the whole Solomonic origin of the song just a tradition? Is the song part of the larger wisdom tradition of the Hebrew Bible? What about the dating? Does it come from the early Israelite monarchy? Well, if Solomon wrote it, it certainly would have. The king right after David. But maybe it's only attributed to Solomon and was actually composed much later, even centuries later. What about similarities between the Song of Songs and Egyptian love songs, or Syrian wedding songs? We can never look at biblical literature in a vacuum. And what about its difficulty entering the biblical canon as Holy Writ? How much difficulty did it have, since after all, it's more than a little bit erotic? And like Esther, there's no real mention of God in the book. The rabbis of centuries later allegorized the entire poem and presented it as a love song of sorts between God and the people of Israel. Somehow it just wasn't spiritual enough for them. So they created this elaborate allegory. But in fact, should it not be read exactly with all of the erotic power of its original text? Meet King Solomon, starring as Shallow Saul. If the Bible rails against shallow infatuation, what makes this poem any different from a very shallow Saul type? According to Phyllis Tribble, there's a very short answer. We do have some random observations. Several verses speak of the king, but authorship is left as an open question. So it has to be inferred. There's mention of Tirzach and Jerusalem in one breath, used to prove that the date of composition was prior to King Omri of the 800s BCE. And yet, what does that really prove? Many appeal to the language of the song as proof of a later date, but the linguistic data is ambiguous. These are all issues, therefore, and can be argued either way. The consistency of the language does some argue for a single author, but even that's in question. Near East literary traditions are careful to maintain stylistic uniformity, whoever wrote them, even if more than one. There are literary links with Egyptian and Babylonian love songs, and Semitic wedding songs, and songs related to Mesopotamian fertility cults. The closest parallels are found in the book of Proverbs. Notice what Phyllis Tribble writes. Of the three speakers, the woman is the most prominent. She opens and closes the entire song. Her voice is dominant throughout. The arrangement recalls the stress placed upon the woman at the conclusion of Genesis 2. This is her whole argument, that this is deliberate, that the concerns of the Song of Songs dovetail back to the account of Eden. That's a deliberate thing. And that the stress placed on the woman at the conclusion of Genesis 2 is now reflected here in this song deliberately by the author, also with the stress on the woman. Although equal with the man in creation, she was nonetheless elevated in emphasis by the design of the story. Again, a remarkable feminist piece of criticism. Though she was equal with the man in creation in Genesis 2, she's elevated in emphasis by the design of the story. And we pointed that out at the beginning of our study, that she's the one who has narrative power. She's advancing the story elements. In the Song of Songs, accent upon the female is further increased by the presence of the daughters of Jerusalem. As a foil and complement to the lovers, this group aids the flow of the action. Women, then, are the principal creators of the poetry of eroticism. That's a powerful argument. If you look at the poetry of eroticism, its creators are women. Strikingly, God does not speak in the song. God does not speak in the song, nor is the deity even mentioned. This divine absence parallels the withdrawal of God in Genesis 2. You have to do a very close reading. Go back to the story of Adam and Eve, where God just exits after creating them. And Tribble is arguing that there's a deliberate parallel in that absence and the absence of God in the song. Is she right? That's the issue. Is she right? After making the woman and bringing her to the transformed earth creature, the deity disappeared from scene 1. All right. The song does appear to belong to the biblical wisdom literature tradition. But in this case, wisdom is depicted, or is depicting, we should say, an amorous relationship. This is wisdom's characterization of love. The voice of love is the woman's voice. And again, that's a feminist comment, a feminist criticism, celebrating the power of love. The rivals are the most fearsome enemy, and death burns like fire. It's unquenchable by ocean depths. All a man's possessions can't buy it. There's a literary climax here, intentional, in chapter 8, where the unsurpassed power of love and value is asserted, followed by a literary relaxation. The argument is this is all intentional, the way it's developed as literature, as poetry. The last segment returning to the beginning, referencing the beloved's brothers, her vineyard and Solomon. The voice of the beloved dominant, her experience of love, both as the one who loves and the one who is loved, is most clearly expressed. Begins with her wish for her lover's kiss and ends with the intimacy, with the invitation for love's intimacy. Let's look again at what Carol Myers writes. The use of desire in the love lyrics of the Song of Songs is thus associated with a rather leisured and altogether pleasurable venture into the agrarian milieu of the couple. If the Song of Songs is indeed a midrash or exposition of the Eden story, the presence of sexual desire along with a sharing of agricultural tasks is a striking echo of Genesis 2. 3 motifs. The idyllic world of Canticles, the Song of Songs, recaptures the monarduous labor of Eden. It also indicates the same interrelationship of sexuality and productivity that Genesis 3:16 emphasizes. Only the Song of Songs returns us to Eden, where the pleasure of sexuality stands apart from the tribulations of its procreative aspect. It's not about procreation in the song. It's all about the pleasure. And where the tending of a beautiful and productive garden does not entail great effort and anguish, just the opposite of what we're left with in the account of Eden after the expulsion. So it's like it's brought us back to Eden only without the disobedience and the expulsion. Despite the broader aspects of desire in Song of Songs, one might be tempted to assign an exclusively sexual meaning to this word. Indeed, at least one scholar would translate it desire for intercourse. And what else does Carol Myers tell us? Full of the language of human love, language so explicit that post-biblical Christian and Jewish commentators treated it as allegory rather than as reality. The activities of the lovers are set against a rural backdrop. Mountains and vales figure prominently. The metaphors and similes drawn from the natural world are not limited to pastoral or wild settings. Cultivated orchards, fields, and vineyards receive playful and rich attention. Domesticated animals find their place alongside wild animals. Cities are not unknown to the poet or poets, but the countryside overwhelmingly provides the extravagant images that make the language of love so vivid. Indeed, the richness and variety of flora and fauna make the poem a kind of response or counterpoint to the Eden story of Genesis 2 and 3. So let's look at the poetry itself. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. As Phyllis Tribble points out again, starting with a female perspective. And by the way, if marriages were arranged in ancient times, the shidduch, the arranged marriage, then this is certainly a pretty erotic image to start it with. Just because marriages were arranged, does that mean they were loveless or without eroticism? The pronouns all refer to the same person, the lover, who may well be Solomon, or at least supposed to be Solomon. That is a big question mark. And we also find the lover speaking similarly of the beloved's love. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes, she says. Your name is like perfume poured out. If it's Solomon, his name would be Shlomo, which doesn't exactly make us think of a perfume poured out, but that is Solomon in Hebrew, Shlomo. No wonder the maidens love you. The olfactory sense, the sense of smell, is very important throughout, just as we see here in the Hebrew. Shmanecha, play on words, and shemen and shimcha. Shimcha is the word for your name, and the perfume poured out is the very same root, or oil, shemen. So that's something in the Hebrew you can only get in the original text, is the play here on the word name and the perfume, the oil, aromatic spices, gums, blended in cosmetic oil. All of this seems to hint at what some psychologists call the collapse of ego boundaries, where you lose yourself in the other person. Some have called it a retreat to infancy, in fact, which is what falling in love is all about. It's what it amounts to, according to some psychologists. You forget about yourself, you lose yourself in the other. And we have reference to female infatuation. The maidens love you, probably the girls of the court or of the royal city. Take me away with you, let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers, or the king's private quarters. We, probably the maidens of verse 3, rejoice and delight in you. How right they are to adore you. Take me away. Is this a sense of an elopement, perhaps? A royal love poem where the king and his beloved are eloping. And of course, it's more than wine. Love is intoxication. Then it says something interesting. Dark am I, yet lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem. Dark like the tents, hand woven from goat hair. Well, if in fact the author were Solomon, why would he be saying, dark am I? Because a tan was not something that royalty experienced or bragged about. It wasn't considered beautiful. It was the mark of the lower class or a worker in the field. And that's what has led some critics to argue that this doesn't seem to fit the royal court, that Solomon didn't write this, but the country folk, perhaps. Don't stare at me because I am dark, because I am darkened by the sun. And the vineyard here is an apt metaphor, because since it yielded wine to which love's excitement is compared, the beloved is compared to a garden, of course, back to Eden, yielding precious fruits for the lover. The lover is portrayed as a shepherd, and the beloved is a shepherdess, all pastoral images. And where you rest your sheep at midday, the time of rest at midday in warm climates. Why should I be veiled, like a veiled woman or a prostitute, is the suggestion, beside the flocks of your friends? The beloved doesn't wish to look for her lover among the shepherds, appearing as though she were a prostitute. Now the man speaks. If you do not know, most beautiful of women, follow the tracks of the sheep. So the beloved is instructed to learn where the lover is by joining the shepherds in the field. I liken you, my darling. This term is used only of the beloved to a mare, very flattering, similar to Theocritus' praise of Helen of Troy, just to show again that no literature is in a vacuum. And yes, scholars find relationship between this poem and ancient Greek literature, Helen of Troy. Her beauty attracts the attention like a mare would among Egyptian chariot stallions. Of course, Solomon imported his horses from Egypt. Goes on, your cheeks are beautiful. We, the daughters of Jerusalem, are they the ones speaking now? Will make your earrings of gold, studded with silver. We always have to be asking who is speaking, because the text itself doesn't tell us. We have to fill that in. Now, the woman speaks. While the king was at his table, my perfume, nard, aromatic oil extracted from roots of perennial herb that grows in India, spread its fragrance. So a lot of the olfactory sense is being evoked throughout the poetry. Like a sachet of myrrh is my lover, aromatic again, from the bark of the balsam tree, used also as an aphrodisiac, or royal nuptial robes. My lover is to me a cluster of henna, a shrub of the Middle East, maybe a cypress, also aromatic. The woman speaks, then the man speaks again. How beautiful you are, my darling. The woman speaks, how handsome you are. Charming, your bed is verdant, and the lovers lie together in the field under the trees. Not in the royal palace, it's all in the field. The beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are firs. Back to the imposter theory. Famous verse, I am a rose of Sharon, a fertile plain south of Mount Carmel in Israel, a lily of the valleys. And the man speaks, like a lily among the thorns is my darling among the maidens. Let's see what Phyllis Tribble has to say, noting that all five senses capitulate to disobedience through the tasting of the forbidden fruit back in Eden. But fully present in the Song of Songs, from the beginning, these senses saturate the poetry to serve only love. Such love is sweet to the taste, like the fruit of the apple tree. Fragrant are the smells of the vineyards, the perfumes of myrrh and frankincense. The embraces of the lovers confirm the delights of touch. A glance of the eyes ravishes the heart. The sound of the lover thrills it. Plants adorn this place of pleasure. Every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And Tribble goes on. The word lily suggests to the man an extravagant comparison to which even the thorns and thistles of the earth contribute. So intentional use of the word lily. Yet her comparison does not stop there. She expands upon images from the plant world to portray the joy her lover embodies. The woman speaks, "Like an apple among the trees of the forest is my lover among the young men." And another famous verse, "His banner over me is love," like the king's love displayed like a large military banner. "Strengthens me with raisins, refresh me with apples," all metaphors for caresses and embraces. "For I am faint with love." Cholah is the word in Hebrew that actually means sick. This is romantic love. This is love sickness. How mature it is another issue. "His left arm is under my head. His right arm embraces me." Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and the does of the field, do not arouse or waken love until it so desires. And this is a dominant verse that is repeated over and over again in the poetry. Writes Phyllis Tribble, at the conclusions of the first 4 sections, the woman utters a refrain that both separates and joins these movements. It begins, "I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem." Clusters of verbal motifs that precede this refrain further interrelate the 5 movements, yielding an ebb and a flow among the images of the song. An examination of the beginnings and endings of these movements shows the cyclic pattern of the overall composition. There's a lot in here, and we really have to stare very carefully at everything that she writes. By speaking first about her lover rather than directly to him, the woman invites us to enter the circle of intimacy. "Oh, that he would kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." With the words of her mouth she reaches many. For the kisses of her mouth she desires only one. And by the end of the movement, her yearnings are realized. So there's a progression here. At the beginning of the movement with the kiss, the end, "His left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me." This verse appears again at the conclusion of the 4th movement, thus providing one of the many verbal links between sections. Since with these words the woman's desire has been fulfilled, she completes the introductory movement by imploring the daughters of Jerusalem to let love happen according to its own rhythm. So love is not to be artificially stimulated. It's to be spontaneous.